There is a particular cruelty in the theatre that has nothing to do with the stories performed upon its stages. It is the cruelty of attention, of 400 people looking at one person and seeing only what they expect to see. I've thought about this a great deal since the case of Miriam Aldgate, and I've concluded that it is not the darkness of human nature that makes such things possible. It is something more forgivable and more disturbing, the simple, deep human habit of narrative. We see what the story tells us we are seeing. We feel what the music tells us we are feeling. And when a woman dies in front of 400 people, and every one of them believes they are watching the finest performance of a celebrated career, the cruelty is not in any individual failure of perception. It is in the nature of theatre itself. The case came to us in an unusual way, which is to say it came to us before anyone knew there was a case. I was at the theatre that night, Holmes was not. He had declined the invitation with the particular brevity he applied to social engagements that held no investigative interest, and had remained at Baker Street with his chemicals and his own company. I went alone, which was not unusual, and I sat in the third row of the stalls at the Regal Theatre on Aldwych with the programme in my lap and the specific pleasant anticipation of a man who has been looking forward to something for several weeks. The production was Desdemona's Hour, a new dramatic work by the playwright Gerald Foss, who had made his name with 2 previous productions of considerable emotional power and was considered, in the theatrical circles I occasionally brushed against, to be doing something genuinely new with the form. The production had been running for 6 weeks to increasing acclaim, and its central performance, Miriam Aldgate as the play's protagonist, a woman navigating the collapse of everything she had built, had been reviewed in terms that I found, frankly, excessive, but that proved on the night I saw it to be entirely inadequate. Miriam Aldgate was 41 years of age. She had been on the London stage since she was 19, had built a reputation of the kind that accumulates slowly and then, at some point, tips into something else, into a quality of attention that an audience brings before the curtain rises, a readiness to be moved that is itself a kind of tribute. She was not beautiful in any obvious sense. Her face was too particular for conventional beauty, too much itself. But she had the quality that the stage demands and that no training can fully manufacture, a presence that made the air around her different from the air elsewhere. On the night of the 14th of October, in the second act of Desdemona's Hour, in the final scene of the play, Miriam Aldgate died. The audience did not notice. They applauded. I need to describe what I saw, because the description matters in a way that descriptions of theatrical performances rarely do. The final scene of Desdemona's Hour required Aldgate's character, a woman named Clara, whose long marriage has been built on a deception she has spent 20 years trying to believe was not a deception, to confront, alone on the stage, the full weight of what she has done and what has been done to her. It was a monologue of approximately 12 minutes' duration, and it ended with Clara sitting in a chair at the center of the stage and going still. The stillness of a woman who has arrived at a kind of peace that was not happiness, but was the end of a particular kind of suffering. This stillness, I later learned, was the performance's signature moment. Every review had mentioned it. The ability to be completely motionless on a stage while an audience held its breath was, apparently, one of Aldgate's specific gifts. On this night, the stillness lasted longer than usual. The house musician, a pianist positioned in the orchestra pit, held the final chord for what felt like a full minute. The lights dropped very slowly. The curtain came down. The audience, after a pause that contained the specific quality of people recovering from something they had not expected to feel, began to applaud, and then, gradually, stood. I stood with them. I was moved in the way that good theatre moves you, the specific physical quality of having had something true shown to you through invented people. I did not think about the length of the stillness. I did not think about Aldgate's color or her breathing. I was watching theater, and the story told me what I was seeing. It was only when the curtain failed to rise for the curtain call, when the applause continued for 4 minutes and the curtain remained down, and the murmuring began, and then the stage manager appeared at the side of the stage with an expression that he was managing very carefully, and said in a voice that was entirely controlled that Miss Aldgate was unwell and would not be taking her bow this evening. That the first cold thing moved through me. I was out of my seat before he finished speaking. The stage manager's name was Henry Plum. He was a thin, capable man of about 45, with the specific professional composure of someone accustomed to managing crises that the audience must not see, and he had deployed that composure so well for those few minutes after the curtain came down that I believe he had not yet fully admitted to himself what he was managing. He admitted it when I showed him my medical credentials, and he took me through the wings to the stage. Miriam Aldgate was in the chair, the same chair she had been in at the end of the play. She was still. The lights above the stage had been brought to working level, and the stage hands who had moved into the space were standing at a careful distance, in the specific posture of people who do not know whether to approach or not. I approached. I knew within 30 seconds of examination what had happened, though the confirmation of mechanism and cause would take longer. Her pulse was absent. Her skin carried the particular temperature of someone who had been gone for some time. Not minutes, but more. Her eyes, which were partially closed in the way the stage lighting had suggested was a performed serenity, were the eyes of a woman who had died not at the end of the monologue, as might first be supposed, but considerably earlier in it. I stood up and looked at Henry Plum, and I told him that Miriam Aldgate was dead, and that the police would need to be called. He looked at the chair. He looked at the stage around him, the set dressing, the props, all the furniture of a scene that had continued after the person at its center was no longer present to give it meaning. She finished the scene, he said. It was not a question. It was the specific statement of a man whose mind was struggling with something. She did not, I said. Or rather, she did not finish it as a living woman. Miss Aldgate died during the monologue. The audience did not know. He was silent for a long time. They gave her a standing ovation, he said. Yes, I said. They did. I sent a message to Holmes from the theater. He arrived 40 minutes later, by which time Lestrade had also appeared with 2 constables, and the theatre had been cleared of its audience with a management of information that the Regal staff performed with the automatic professionalism of people protecting a production even after the production had become irrelevant. Holmes came through the wings and onto the stage and stood before the chair where Aldgate still sat. She had not been moved, I had insisted on that, with the expression he wore when he was looking at something that interested him in the specific way that only the genuinely unusual could. He did not speak for 5 minutes. He examined, without touching, the position of the body, the chair, the stage around it, the set dressing. He looked at the position of the lights above. He went to the wings on both sides and looked back at the chair from those angles. He went to the edge of the stage and looked at it from the perspective of the stalls. Then he turned to me. "When did she die?" he asked. "Approximately 35 to 45 minutes before I examined her," I said, "given the state of the body and the stage temperature." "The monologue runs 12 minutes, Holmes said. "The scene before it?" "Approximately 20 minutes. She was on stage alone for the full final scene, which is 32 minutes, including both the dialogue scene and the monologue." "So she died," Holmes said, "somewhere between 5 and 15 minutes into the final scene, while speaking, or while moving. Not, as one might first assume, during the static final moment." "Yes," I said. He looked at the chair again. "Watson," he said, "she died on that stage, in front of 400 people, and not one of them knew. The question I want answered is not how she died. The question is whether the people around her knew she was dying, and if so, who arranged for no one to notice." Holmes spent 3 hours in the Regal Theatre that night after the body had been removed and Lestrade had completed his initial process. He moved through the building with the systematic thoroughness he brought to physical spaces that had become crime scenes, though the word crime was still, at that point in the evening, conditional on the post-mortem results. I walked with him through parts of it and made notes, and stood back during the parts where his examination required him to be entirely alone with what he was looking at. The Regal was one of the older surviving theatres of central London, built in the 1840s, renovated twice, with the specific character of a building that had been added to rather than redesigned. The backstage area was a maze of corridors and staircases and storage rooms that made sense only if you understood the accretions of 80 years of practical theatrical need. There were 3 dressing room corridors, a green room of surprising size, a fly gallery that required the management of 37 separate lines, and a props room of such concentrated density that navigating it required the knowledge of where things were rather than any visible organizational system. Holmes examined the stage first, then the wings on both sides, then the prompt corner, then the dressing rooms in sequence. Aldgate's dressing room was at the end of the principal corridor. The largest room, as befitted the production's leading actress, with a long mirror above a dressing table covered in the accumulated personal materials of 6 weeks of performance. Holmes stood in the doorway of it for some time before entering. "Who had access to this room?" he asked Henry Plum, who had remained in attendance with the composure of a man who had decided that professional function was the only available response to the night. "Miss Aldgate had a key," Plum said. "Her dresser, Mrs. Patton, myself as stage manager, the theatre's building manager, Mr. Vokes, and the production's director, Mr. Carey." He paused. "She also entertained visitors in her dressing room before and after performances, which was at her own discretion." "Visitors tonight?" "Before the performance, yes. I did not take note of everyone. It wasn't my practice to monitor Miss Aldgate's visitors. She was the production's principal and she managed her own arrangements. But you saw some of them." "I passed the corridor twice. Her co-star, Mr. Elliot Reed, went to pay his respects before curtain. This was their custom. And a man I did not recognize, around 6 o'clock, well dressed, he was leaving as I was passing." Holmes had been looking at the dressing table while Plum spoke. He turned now. "You did not recognize him. Had you seen him before?" "I couldn't be certain either way. There are many people who attend productions regularly, particularly acclaimed ones. It would not have been unusual for someone to visit." Holmes nodded and went to the dressing table. He examined the surface with the specific quality of attention he brought to things that had been used recently and might retain the record of that use. The mirror, the brushes and powders and cosmetic materials arranged along the table's length. A glass, a small bottle. He lifted the small bottle and looked at it. It was an ordinary size for a theatrical dresser's table, the kind that might contain anything from a tincture to a throat preparation. Holmes uncorked it, held it briefly to his nose without inhaling deeply, and recorked it. "Watson," he said. I came to him. He handed me the bottle and waited. I uncorked it and held it to my nose with the careful professional approach of someone who knows that what is in an unlabeled bottle may not be benign. The smell was familiar, faint, sweet, the specific organic sweetness of a particular class of compound. I looked at Holmes. "Cardiac," I said. "Cardiac," he agreed. "Specifically, I suspect of the digitalis family, in a concentration considerably higher than therapeutic. But you will know better than I after the post-mortem." He took the bottle back and wrapped it carefully. "The question," he said to Plum, "of who placed this bottle on Miss Aldgate's dressing table is the question on which this case turns." Elliot Reed was still in the theatre when Holmes asked to speak with him. He was in his own dressing room, still in the remnants of his stage makeup, sitting in the way that people sit when they have received a shock and have not yet found the posture appropriate to the new situation. He was 38 years of age, with a particular quality of male attractiveness that the stage develops and exaggerates. Broad-shouldered, dark-haired, with a mobile, expressive face that was currently doing nothing expressive at all, which was, in the circumstances, more unsettling than if it had been. He had worked with Miriam Aldgate for 6 weeks on this production. He had known her slightly before that. They had been in the same theatrical world for 15 years, without crossing into genuine acquaintance. He described her, when Holmes asked, as a force, his word, and he said it with the specific quality of someone who means something both positive and tiring by the term. "Were you aware of any difficulties she was experiencing?" Holmes asked. "Professionally or personally?" Reed was quiet for a moment. "She was under pressure," he said. "The production had been more successful than expected, which sounds like a good problem but creates its own difficulties. There were negotiations underway about extending the run and taking it to New York. She had a particular interest in the New York question." "What kind of interest?" "She wanted to go. There were people who wanted the production to go without her." He looked at Holmes directly. "I'm telling you this because it will come out anyway, and because she deserves a full account." "Who wanted the production to go without her?" "Gerald Foss," Reed said, "the playwright. He had become attached to the production in the way that writers sometimes do, and he had decided that it could work with a different leading actress in New York, a younger one. He believed Miriam's age was a liability for the American market." A pause. "She knew about his position. They had argued about it directly. 3 days ago." "In the theater?" "In the theater, yes. I did not hear the argument, but I heard about it through Mrs. Patton, who was present." Holmes thanked him and was already thinking about the next conversation. Gerald Foss was not in the theater. He had attended the performance, had a seat in the 4th row of the stalls, according to Plum, and had left during the curtain call confusion before the stage manager's announcement. Holmes obtained his address through the theatre's records and sent a message through Lestrade requesting that Foss not leave London and would be available for interview at 10 o'clock the following morning. The director, Martin Carey, was in the green room. He was 61 years of age, a man who had directed more productions than he could immediately remember, with the specific exhausted authority of someone who had been managing the creative egos of others for 4 decades. He received Holmes with the cooperative weariness of a man for whom the question of who was responsible for something was professionally familiar, even if the something was not. He told Holmes that Miriam Aldgate had been in good health throughout the production's run, that she had complained of fatigue in the previous week, but that this was not unusual in a demanding production, that the argument with Foss had been significant. He had not been present, but had been informed by several people, and that Aldgate had been, in the days since, performing with a specific intensity that he associated with anger being channeled into work. "Was there anything unusual about tonight's performance?" Holmes asked. Carey considered. "The second half of the final scene," he said. "She was different. I watched from the wings for part of it. The quality of stillness was there, as always, but there was something underneath it that I hadn't seen before. Something heavier." He paused. "I thought it was the argument with Foss. I thought she was using it. That's what we do. We use what we have." Another pause. "I didn't know she was dying." His voice had not changed, but something in the sentence sat in the green room with the particular weight of a truth that has arrived too late to be useful. Mrs. Agnes Patton had been Miriam Aldgate's dresser for 11 years. She was 64 years of age, a small woman with the broad, capable hands of someone who spent their working life managing the physical requirements of theatrical performance. The costumes, the quick changes, the maintenance of appearance under conditions that were actively hostile to appearance. She had the quality that long service to one person sometimes produces, a comprehensive knowledge of that person that was not quite intimacy, but was something more specific than professional familiarity. She was in the wardrobe room when Holmes found her, folding a costume with the automatic motion of someone keeping their hands busy because the alternative was not managing. She stopped folding when Holmes came in and looked at him with the direct, already said goodbye quality of a woman who had understood before Holmes arrived what the conversation was likely to be about. "You were with her before the performance tonight," Holmes said. "From 5 o'clock, Mrs. Patton said. "She arrived at 5. Performance at 7:30. "Tell me about the evening." Mrs. Patton sat down on the wardrobe room chair and folded her hands. "She was quiet," she said. "More quiet than usual. Not unhappy. She wasn't a person who showed unhappiness as a rule. But contained. She ate very little of what was sent up. She spent longer than usual at the Mirror. She had a visitor," Holmes said. "A man the stage manager didn't recognize. Around 6 o'clock. Mrs. Patton was quiet for a moment. Not a surprised quiet, Holmes noted. A deciding quiet. "He came twice this week," she said. "This was the 3rd visit. He told her his name was Cooper. I don't know if that's his real name. He was solicitous. He brought something for her on the 1st visit, a gift of some kind. She accepted it." "What kind of gift?" Mrs. Patton looked at her folded hands. "A preparation. She had mentioned fatigue to him, apparently, and he said it was a tonic of some kind. A continental preparation that was very effective. She was skeptical at first. On the 2nd visit, he persuaded her. She used it. She began using it on Wednesday. 4 days ago, she said it helped. I noticed she seemed steadier after she used it. More herself. A pause. She used it tonight, before I left her to go to her entrance position. She said it helped her focus before a performance." Holmes and I looked at each other across the wardrobe room. "The bottle," I said. "On the dressing table." "Yes," said Mrs. Patton. "He left a second one on Wednesday. She was on her 2nd bottle." Holmes was already standing. "Describe the man. Everything you can." Mrs. Patton described a man of approximately 50, medium height, well dressed in the manner of someone who took care with appearance without being extravagant about it. Dark hair with grey at the temples. A precise quality about him. She used the word precise in the way people use it when they mean that a person's neatness has something studied about it. He spoke with an accent that was English but had something else underneath it. She could not say what. Holmes listened with his eyes half closed, the quality he had when he was committing a description to memory while simultaneously running it against the catalogue of people he already knew. When she finished, he asked, "How did he know to come to the theatre? How did he know Miss Aldgate?" Mrs. Patton looked at her hands again. "He said he was a friend of Mr. Foss. He said the playwright had mentioned that Miss Aldgate was finding the run tiring and he wanted to help." The room was quiet. "Gerald Foss sent him," Holmes said. "He said so," Mrs. Patton replied. "I don't know if it was true." Holmes sent an urgent message to Lestrade that night after we left the theatre and before the post-mortem had been completed. The message requested that Gerald Foss be detained rather than merely invited to a morning interview. He sent a second message to the chemical analyst at St. Bartholomew's Hospital, requesting a specific toxicological analysis of the bottle contents. He sent a third message to a contact I did not know in the direction of the theatrical world, asking about any man named Cooper recently connected to the London stage. Then he sat at the Baker Street window until 4 in the morning and did not speak, and did not play the violin, which was the specific quality of a case that had moved beyond intellectual interest into something that required a different kind of engagement. I slept badly and woke at 6 to find him still at the window with a cold cup of tea beside him and the expression of a man who has been rearranging something in his mind and has arrived at an arrangement that satisfies him. "The death," he said without preamble, "was designed to occur on stage." I sat down. "You believe it was deliberate?" "I believe it was precise. The tonic was not administered once and left to chance. It was administered over 4 days, in controlled doses, in a preparation that was calibrated to produce a cardiac event within a specific time window. The person who created it, Cooper, whatever his real name is is someone with pharmaceutical knowledge. He looked at me. But the timing. Watson, the timing is not incidental. It was designed so that she would die during the performance. On stage. Why? I said. That is the question I have been sitting with for the past 3 hours, he said, and I have come to a conclusion that I want to test this morning. Because there are 2 possible answers, and they lead to very different places. Tell me. The first is that the death on stage was intended to look like a natural death occurring in extraordinary circumstances. A woman of 41, known to be fatigued, performing an emotionally demanding role. She collapsed on stage, and no one knew until it was too late. The circumstances of the death provide a natural explanation that obscures the murder. And the second, he looked at the grey London morning. The second is that the performance itself was part of the design, that someone wanted Miriam Aldgate to die in front of 400 people, giving what appeared to be the finest performance of her life, and they wanted the audience to applaud. That the cruelty of that specific death, honored in the moment of dying by people who did not know she was dying, was not incidental. It was the point. I sat with this for a moment. That would require a particular kind of motivation. Yes, Holmes said. It would require the motivation of someone for whom humiliation was not sufficient, someone for whom ending was not sufficient, someone who wanted her last experience to be of a specific quality. Someone who hated her, I said. Someone who loved the theatre enough to use it, Holmes said. Which may be the same person. Or maybe 2 people. Gerald Foss was at his home in Bloomsbury when Holmes and I arrived with Lestrade at 9:30 in the morning. He had not left London as instructed, and he received us in his study with the expression of a man who had not slept and was managing his appearance of composure through the specific effort of will that writers apply to the management of reality. He was 44 years of age, with the angular, slightly unkempt quality of someone who spent most of his time in the life of his mind and regarded the physical world as an inconvenience to be managed with minimum expenditure of attention. His study was the concentrated disorder of active intellectual work. Manuscripts in stages of completion on every surface, books marked with ribbons and scraps of paper, a writing desk that showed the specific wear of years of daily use. He had heard about Aldgate's death. Word had reached him through the theatrical networks that move information quickly in the specific environment of the London stage. He knew she was dead. He did not know, as of our arrival, that the death was being treated as suspicious. Holmes informed him of this in the specific direct way he delivered information when the delivery of it was itself investigative, watching the response rather than managing it. Foss's response was not what I expected from a man who might be a murderer. It was not the careful composure of someone who had prepared for this conversation. It was the specific white-faced quality of someone receiving information that fundamentally disrupts an existing mental structure. Suspicious, he repeated. We believe she was poisoned, Holmes said. Foss looked at the manuscript on his desk. It was a long look, not avoidance, but the specific kind of look that people direct at things that are not the conversation when the conversation has become too large for the room. I did not poison her, he said. I want to say that plainly. Tell me about the man named Cooper, Holmes said. Something moved in Foss's expression. Cooper, he repeated. The name had a quality in his mouth of something he was tasting and finding less straightforward than he expected. He visited Miss Aldgate 3 times this week at the Regal, Holmes said. He told her dresser that you had sent him, that he was a friend of yours who had heard she was fatigued. I know a man named Cooper, Foss said. I would not describe him as a friend. He is... He stopped. He is someone I have dealt with in the past, in a context that I find difficult to explain cleanly. Explain it uncleanlily, Holmes said. Foss looked at him. Then he looked at the manuscript again. Then he said, I was in financial difficulty 18 months ago. A specific kind of difficulty, a debt of the kind that one incurs to certain people rather than to institutions. Cooper managed the collection of that debt. I repaid it. There was a period during the repayment when Cooper had knowledge of certain matters relating to my personal life that I would prefer to have remained private. He had leverage over you, Holmes said. He had information, which amounts to the same thing. Foss pressed his lips together. When the Aldgate situation arose, when I became concerned about the New York question and she made clear that she would not stand aside, Cooper contacted me. He had heard about the production somehow. He made a proposal. Holmes was very still. He proposed to manage the situation, Foss said. His voice had gone flat. He said he could resolve the difficulty. He said he had methods. I told him... He stopped again. A longer stop. I told him that I was not in the business of harming people and that the conversation was over. And did the conversation end? Holmes said. I believed it did, Foss said. I did not contact him again. He did not contact me. I assumed he had understood my position. He looked at Holmes with the expression of a man who has just arrived at a conclusion he would prefer not to have reached. Are you telling me he acted regardless? I'm asking whether that is possible, Holmes said. Foss was quiet for a long time. It is possible, he said. Cooper is... He searched for a word. He is a person for whom the successful completion of a problem is a matter of professional pride. If he had decided the problem was his to solve... He stopped. Describe him, Holmes said. The description matched Mrs. Patton's. The name Cooper, Holmes established through Lestrade's official channels and through his own considerable network, belonged to 3 men in London who could be described as operating in the territory between legal commerce and active criminality. The first 2 were eliminated quickly. One was in Edinburgh. One was demonstrably not the physical description provided. The third was a man whose actual name was not Cooper at all, but who used the name as a professional designation. His actual name was Marcus Thiele. He was 49 years of age, formerly of Vienna, latterly of London, and he operated in the specific space between pharmaceutical knowledge and the kind of services that pharmaceutical knowledge could provide to people with particular problems. He was known to 3 of Holmes's informants by the Cooper name, and to one of them by his real name. He had a room in Marylebone and an address in the city that served as an office for a legitimate import business that was the visible layer over a less legitimate set of activities. Holmes obtained this information by noon of the day after Aldgate's death. By 2 o'clock, Lestrade had a warrant. By 3 o'clock, they were at the Marylebone address. Thiele was not there. What was there, in the 2 rooms that constituted his private quarters, was the evidence of a departure that had been managed with care and speed. Clothing gone, personal documents gone, the specific organization of a room that had been cleared rather than merely vacated. He had known, or suspected, that the death would not remain uncomplicated. Holmes spent 20 minutes in the empty rooms and emerged with 2 things. A small paper sleeve of the kind used to protect photographs, found behind the lining of a drawer, and a half-burned letter fragment from the fireplace grate that had not fully combusted. The photograph sleeve was empty, but the paper had a specific watermark that Holmes recognized. The letter fragment contained 6 lines of text, the beginning and end of which were gone, but the middle of which contained a reference to the New York production and a figure that appeared to be a financial arrangement. The post-mortem confirmed what the bottle had suggested. The preparation administered to Miriam Aldgate over the 4 days preceding her death contained a concentrated derivative of digitalis glycoside, the specific compound that, in therapeutic doses, is used to regulate cardiac function and, in the doses Thiele had calibrated, produced a progressive cardiac suppression that would, under the physical demands of a sustained theatrical performance, terminate the heart. The timing was precise in a way that required specific knowledge. Thiele had known the demands of the role. He had known the length of the final scene. He had calibrated the dosage so that the cumulative effect of 4 days of administration, combined with the physical and emotional intensity of the performance, would produce its result during that specific scene. The longest, most demanding, most emotionally concentrated section of the play. He had, in other words, built a mechanism as precise as a clock, set it running 4 days before the performance, and been confident enough in his calibration to leave the theater before the final scene ended. He had been in the 4th row of the stalls for the first act, Lestrade confirmed from the ticket records. He had not been present for the second. He wanted to see her alive, Holmes said when this information came in. We were at Baker Street, the information arriving in pieces through Lestrade's constables and Holmes's own channels. He attended the first act to confirm the mechanism was running correctly. And then he left. He didn't want to watch her die, I said. He didn't need to, Holmes said. He was confident in the engineering. He left because the result was, to him, a matter of professional rather than personal interest. I thought about this. Foss, I said. You believe Foss commissioned him after all? Holmes picked up the letter fragment from the table. The financial figure in this letter is consistent with a significant commission rather than the kind of informal favor that people do for acquaintances. And the reference to the New York production is specific enough to suggest that whoever wrote it was directly connected to the production. He set it down. But the letter is incomplete. And Foss's account of refusing the commission was given with a quality of distress that I found not necessarily honest, but consistent with a man who is genuinely uncertain about his own culpability. He may have refused the commission, and Cooper acted anyway, I said. Yes, or he may have given the commission, and is now attempting to construct a version of events in which he bears minimal responsibility. Holmes looked at the fire. Or there is a third possibility that I have been considering since last night. What third possibility? That Foss is not the only person who had reason to want Miriam Aldgate removed. That Cooper Teal was not working for Foss, but for someone else who had a different kind of interest in the outcome. He looked at me. Foss wanted her out of the New York production. That is a commercial motivation, significant but limited. The specific design of this death, on stage, during a performance, the audience applauding, that design has a quality that exceeds commercial motivation. It has a personal quality, the specific cruelty of it. Someone who wanted to humiliate her in the act of celebrating her, I said. Yes, the question is whether Foss is that person, or whether there is someone else whose relationship with Aldgate contained that specific quality of feeling. Elliot Reed came to Baker Street the following morning without being asked. He had been thinking, he said, since the interview at the theater. He sat in the visitor chair with the composure he had not entirely managed on the night of the death, and told Holmes something he had not told him before. Miriam Aldgate had received a letter 6 weeks ago, around the time the production opened. She had shown it to Reed because she had wanted a witness to her reaction, which was, he said, one of the most unsettling things he had ever seen. She had read the letter in front of him and said nothing for a full minute, and then folded it and put it in her bag and said entirely calmly, "He has decided to make it theatrical." Reed had not asked who he was. He had known, from the specific quality of her saying it, that this was not a question she was ready to answer. He had never seen the letter. He did not know its contents, but he had seen her face while she read it, and the face had contained something he described as not fear, exactly. Recognition. The recognition of something she had been expecting for a long time. Did she ever say anything more about it? Holmes asked. Once, Reed said. 3 weeks ago, we were in the green room after a performance. She said, I remember the exact words because they were strange. She said, he always understood that the stage was the only place where I was fully real. He's going to use that. Holmes was absolutely still. She knew, I said. The understanding arriving cold and complete. She knew she was in danger, Holmes said. She knew the design, or suspected it. He looked at Reed. "She continued performing." "She did," Reed said. "Why?" Reed was quiet for a moment. "Because she was Miriam Aldgate," he said. "And because I think she decided that if she was going to be used by the theatre, she would be the one who chose what performance she gave." The room was quiet with that for a long time. The watermark on the paper sleeve from Thiele's room was a private stationer's mark, the kind used by customers who ordered custom stationery rather than purchasing it commercially. Holmes identified the stationer through the combination of his knowledge of London's trade and a visit, with my company, to the relevant street in St. James's. The stationer confirmed, after appropriate persuasion, that the watermarked paper was from an order placed by a man named Harlan Voss. Harlan Voss. Holmes said the name once and then was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Of course." I did not know the name. Holmes explained it to me as we walked back from street James's in the compressed, efficient way he delivered background information when the background had become relevant. Harlan Voss was 53 years of age. He had been, for approximately 15 years, one of the significant financial backers of London's commercial theatre. Not a producer in any hands-on sense, he did not direct or manage or involve himself in the creative process. He was a backer, the person whose capital made productions possible, whose name appeared in programs under the heading "with the grateful support of," whose presence at opening nights was noted without being the subject of particular attention. He had backed 3 of Miriam Aldgate's previous productions. He had, according to Holmes's network, been in a significant personal relationship with Aldgate approximately 7 years ago. A relationship that had ended with a specific quality of acrimony that people in the theatrical world still referenced obliquely when both names came up. And he had, Holmes had learned in the night's inquiries, withdrawn his backing from the Regal's New York production of Desdemona's Hour 6 weeks ago at approximately the same time as the letter arrived. He backed away from the production, I said, when he had already arranged its outcome. "Yes," Holmes said, "and he sent the letter to Aldgate at the same time. Because he wanted her to know, not enough to be actionable, something that could be denied, that she couldn't take to the police, but enough that she understood." "He wanted her to know it was him," I said. "He wanted her to perform knowing." "He wanted," Holmes said, with the specific controlled quality he used when something genuinely disturbed him, to be the only audience member who knew what the performance actually was. Holmes did not go to Harlan Voss immediately. This was against Lestrade's instinct, which was to move the moment a name was established. Holmes argued for 24 hours, which he used in 2 ways. The first was to find Marcus Thiele. Thiele had not left London, which Holmes had suspected from the beginning. A man who managed disappearances professionally did not make the amateur's mistake of leaving. He made the professional's choice of becoming unremarkable. He was in a boarding house in Southwark, registered under a different name, and Holmes's network found him through the specific combination of the physical description and the continental background and the known habit of pharmacological supply that Thiele could not entirely set aside even in a period of lying low. Lestrade's men brought him in on the morning of the 2nd day. He sat in the interview room at Scotland Yard with the specific composed quality of a man who has been in this situation before and has a policy for it, and he said nothing useful for the first hour. It was when Lestrade, at Holmes's suggestion, mentioned the name Harlan Voss that the composed quality developed a crack. Small, barely perceptible. But Holmes was watching for it, and he saw it, and he leaned forward in his chair and said, "He gave you the pharmacological brief. He knew the specific compound to use, the digitalis derivative, because he understood the cardiac demands of the role and had medical knowledge from his own history. He was very precise about the timing." Thiele said nothing. "He wanted her to die during the final scene," Holmes said. "Not before. She needed to complete the performance. Not after. She needed to die before the curtain. The window was extremely specific. You are a professional, and you calibrated it professionally. But the brief came from someone who understood both the theatre and the physiology. Thiele looked at Holmes for a long time. Then, with the specific economy of a professional calculating the optimal response to a situation that has closed on him, he said, "The commission was through an intermediary. I did not meet the principal directly." "But you knew who the principal was," Holmes said. A pause. "Yes," Thiele said. Harlan Voss was at his home in Kensington when Holmes, Lestrade, and I arrived on the afternoon of the second day. It was a significant house, the house of a man who had spent 30 years in the management of significant capital and had accumulated the visible signs of that management, with the taste of someone who genuinely loved what the capital could be used to acquire. The walls held paintings of quality. The shelves held books that had been read. The drawing room in which he received us had the specific quality of a space that had been arranged by someone for whom the arrangement of a room was a considered act. He was 53 years of age, and he looked, in the afternoon light of his drawing room, like a man who had been waiting, not anxiously. That was not the quality. More like a man who had made a reservation at a restaurant months in advance and had arrived precisely on time and was waiting to be seated. Holmes sat down across from him and said, "You loved her." It was not the beginning I'd expected. Lestrade, beside me, had the expression of a man managing his instinct to begin differently. Voss looked at Holmes with the expression of a man encountering a sentence he has been both dreading and needing to hear for years. "Yes," he said. "And she ended it," Holmes said, 7 years ago. "And she did so in a way that you experienced as a performance." Voss's jaw moved slightly. "She told me," he said, "in a restaurant with other people at the adjacent table. She timed it so that I could not respond fully. She managed my reaction by managing the environment. She treated it," he stopped, "as a scene," Holmes said. "As a role she had decided to play," Voss said. "The woman ending the relationship with the appropriate dignity and economy. She gave a performance, and I sat across from her and was the audience. And you decided," Holmes said, "that if she was going to use the theatre for personal purposes, you would use it for yours." Voss looked at the room around him, the paintings, the books, the drawing room arranged with the care of someone who understood the arrangement of spaces. "I backed 3 of her productions," he said. "I gave her the stages she performed on. I made it possible, in a literal financial sense, for her to become what she became." He looked at Holmes. "And she used me. She used my money and my support and my love, and she performed for me the way she performed for everyone. There was no inside. There was only the performance. So you decided to be the only person who saw the real performance," Holmes said quietly. "The performance she didn't know was being given. I wanted—" Voss stopped, started again. "I wanted the audience to love her in the moment she was dying. I wanted the standing ovation to be her death." He said it with a quality that I found more disturbing than anger would have been, a quality of satisfaction that was also, underneath it, grief. I wanted the last thing she experienced, if she experienced anything, to be exactly what she had always chosen over everything else. The audience, the approval. I wanted to give her that. The room was quiet. "She knew," Holmes said. "She knew what you had done." Voss looked at him. "She received your letter, she understood, and she performed anyway." Holmes looked at the man across from him. "She chose to give the performance knowing it was her last. That is what you gave her, the choice. And she made it." Something moved in Voss's face. Whatever satisfaction had been there was gone, or had become something else, something more complicated than satisfaction and less comfortable. "She beat me," he said softly. "Yes," Holmes said. "I think she did." The case resolved through the official processes with the particular momentum that cases involving documented evidence and a secured witness acquire once the machinery is properly engaged. Thiele's testimony, combined with the financial records that connected Voss to the commission and the letter fragment from the Marylebone room, provided the basis for formal charges. The pharmacological evidence was unambiguous. The post-mortem was definitive. Gerald Voss was not charged. Holmes's final assessment was that Voss had been approached by Thiele on Voss's behalf, Thiele having learned of the Voss-Aldgate conflict through Voss's close attention to the production, and that Voss's refusal had been genuine, if not vigorous enough. He had failed to take the approach to the police, which was a failure of a kind that the law had limited capacity to address. He lost the production regardless. The Regal closed Desdemona's hour 10 days after Aldgate's death, and the New York plans dissolved in the attention of the case. Marcus Thiele cooperated fully once it became clear that the alternative was to carry the entire weight of a murder charge alone. His cooperation was, from a legal standpoint, valuable. From any other standpoint, it was simply what it was. Harlan Voss made no attempt to deny the essentials of what Holmes had established. He engaged a solicitor of considerable ability, and the proceedings were lengthy and the eventual outcome occupied more column inches in the legal press than the theatrical. But the outcome was the outcome. Elliot Reed went back to the theater. He said, "When I ran into him at a dinner some months later and we spoke briefly about it, that there was nothing else to do, that Miriam Aldgate would have said the same." Mrs. Agnes Patton retired. She had been Aldgate's dresser for 11 years, and she did not take another principal. I heard from the theatrical world some months later that she had been given a position in a theatrical archive, cataloguing the records of productions that the archive maintained. It seemed appropriate. She had known Aldgate better than most people, and the archive was a way of continuing to know her. Holmes spoke about the case on 2 occasions in the weeks following its resolution. The first time, he said only this: "The use of someone's defining quality as the instrument of their destruction is the specific cruelty of someone who loved that quality." Voss did not hate the theater. He loved it. That is what made it available to him as a weapon. The second time was longer and came after an evening at the theater. A different production, a different theater, nothing connected to the case. We had seen a perfectly competent production of something unrelated, and we were walking back toward Baker Street through the October dark, and Holmes said, "She knew, Watson. She received the letter and understood it, and she performed anyway. Not because she was unafraid, because the stage was the place where she was, as she said to Reed, fully real. He tried to use that against her, and instead she used it herself." "It was brave," I said. "It was more than brave," Holmes said. "It was a choice about what meaning to make of an event she could not prevent. She could not stop what he had put in motion, but she could decide what the performance was." He walked a few more steps. The audience stood up. 400 people who had no idea what they were applauding stood up for her. "And he was the only one who knew," I said. "He was the only one who knew," Holmes said. And what he discovered, sitting there in the 4th row watching her perform, was that the knowledge did not give him what he thought it would give him. That watching someone be great in the moment of their dying is not the experience of having power over them. It is the experience of being their audience. He paused. She beat him. She performed the finest scene of her career, in the full knowledge of what it was, and when the curtain came down, the house gave her a standing ovation. He said nothing more for the remainder of the walk. I wrote the case that winter and put it in the drawer with the others. It stayed there for a long time. I'm not certain it belongs in print even now, but I set it down here because the story of Miriam Aldgate seems to me to be one that ought to exist in some form. The story of a woman who was used by the theater and who, at the last, used the theater herself and gave a final performance that no one who was there will forget, even though none of them knew what they were watching. The stage remembers everything. That was what Harlan Voss understood and what he tried to exploit. What he did not understand was that the stage belongs to no one but the person standing on it. Miriam Aldgate stood on it to the end. The curtain came down. The house stood. That is the whole of it.